Look at the screen also.
Oh, sure.
Like,
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us this evening for summer sessions. Series from the BSA. And just a few housekeeping, I'm Jenny Efford, I'm the policy director here. And before I pass it along to our moderating speakers tonight, this session is being recorded. Let's see. Okay, so yes, the session is being recorded this evening. And so yes, know that. And then the bathrooms, if you need them, I know I heard an echo and I will fix that in a moment. The bathrooms, if you need them, are through the double doors, all the way down the hall on the left. The code is 0280 star, posted there if you can't see it either. And there are some people here that are joining us remotely, so we'll ask the speakers to use the microphone as well. And now I will pass it along.
super. Hi, everyone.
You know what? Is the person turn that down so you can hear it? Just the volume. Just get the volume on so you can hear it. Yep.
Okay. Anyways, thanks everyone for coming. Very delighted to welcome you to the BSA this evening. What a wonderful evening it is in Boston. And back to in-person events at the BSA. Always very good, very wonderful to see you all here, to see all your faces. My name is Jeffrey Burchard. Yep.
Do you have it? Just the volume. I just might have the volume on my computer.
MIT BAC. The highest density of architecture schools in the world. We don't take advantage often enough of the breadth of knowledge and of different methodologies of teaching architecture students and also engaging with the practice. So we created this series called Summer Sessions, which will bring together 3 faculty from different schools of architecture and with 1 moderator on 3 subjects throughout the summer. So tonight we're talking about professional practice. On June 29th in the same space, we'll be addressing materials and making. And then in July, on a date almost confirmed, but not quite, we'll be talking about architecture and race. And we have set these sessions up not as sort of sales pitches for each other's schools, but instead just a kind of open and honest conversation about what different faculty are thinking about and what their students are thinking about and what assignments reflect and how different efforts inside and around the classroom are affecting the way we think about different issues and also how our students are being prepared and themselves are thinking in new ways and innovative ways that are finding their way into the profession. So we have tonight with us Beth Lundell Garber. She's the Dean Faculty of Practice at the BAC, and also, yes, the founder of BLG Architecture. Next to her is Jeremy Munn, who is at Northeastern. He's a lecturer at Northeastern, but also the program director. I'm not sure if I have the old title or the new title.
Program Director of Capital Projects.
Program Director for Capital Projects at Northeastern. So he is on the client side of a lot of relationships, but also teaching architecture students about professional practice in a very particular way. And then Elizabeth Christopher Reddy, who is also an assistant professor in practice of architecture at Harvard, and who teaches a few seminars on practice there, and is the founder of a firm called Supernormal in Boston. And is this the order we're going to go in terms of presentations? Great. So each of these three have prepared a short presentation. We've asked them to keep it quite consolidated because what we really want to have is a conversation. So we started this conversation about a week ago between us on a Zoom call, and we want to get to that back to that conversation as soon as possible, and with the group that's in the audience here. So Beth will start, and then Elizabeth, and then Jeremy, and then we'll have a conversation. Okay.
And to advance the slides, we'll just say. Oh, maybe it's on.
You hit the button, I'll say next. Next.
Should I be pointing to the? It's all good.
It's okay. We're all-
It's all
we're
good.
already
This is
doing
real.
You're the
It's been what,
Yeah.
2.5
What is this in
years
person?
since I've been here, so. we're all amazing.
Where's Zoom when you need it?
All right, hold on, I will. Yeah, hold on one second.
Yeah, we could do next.
Yeah, okay, and then we'll get to that.
All right, so next, we're gonna talk about raising sites. Briefly, I'm from the Boston Architectural College. I think I've got involved there that our distinction is we really do mean business when it comes to emerging from practice. So my role as dean of practice is kind of overseeing and shepherding that component of our curriculum. Just a couple of other details. The first really primary of which is that we've got some pretty bold plans to double our size within the next 5 years as part of our new strategic plan. At the BAC, we have 3 one-credit courses where we divide up our professional practice curriculum. Dr. Gamatu over there oversees that, and I teach. You can go back to the next slide. Yeah, that's great. I teach construction and evaluation, which is usually the last of the sequence. We've got practice management, project management, and construction evaluation. In my teaching, I find, and I don't know about you all, but that there tends to be 3 different types of topics that fall under categories of projects, practice, and then the profession. And oh yeah, we're gonna get there. And I think we can do the next slide. All right. And you know, you're always during the class doing this dance of what is the normative and the dominant way. In this case, it would be kind of what you need to tell your students so that they feel like their professional practice is contributing to the AREs, things like this. And then the emergent progressive topics. And I find that the emergent topics really come out when you're talking about practice. Next slide. So just to give you an example of kind of dominant normative that I'm talking about topics, this is a really broad overview Over the past several years, I've done a lot of work with Bill Bernstein at Yale and Renee Chang at the University of Washington, and a lot of this was influenced by them and kind of the way that they were approaching all of these topics. So yeah, you know, dominant normative. Generally, when I talk about these things, it's not quite as creative. And then next slide, with emergent, progressive, you know, that's when we really start to get into failures, research, risk as a value proposition, social justice, equity, AI, machine learning, all of the really fun things that I think we're going to be hearing about today. There are two distinct places. So next slide. My approach to professional practice when I'm teaching it is really trying to adopt the idea that architecture in and of itself is a living organic system, and that because of that, it is going to die. And that our profession, as we know it, is a living, breathing system that we have for, you know, over a century. You can see many of the timelines here, tried to kind of fix and rework and adapt and make better, but that none of that is going to work, and that it's going to die. And that's because it's a living system and nature runs its course. And nature will organically show us what the new system is through these 5 roles, I say. So this is how I approach my class and practice. Next slide. For those of you that like sort of systems change theory, this is a 2 loops model, adapted from a 2 loops model, which came from the Berkana Institute, which is Margaret Wheatley and Deborah Fries, who's a Bostonian. And you know, I think the first system we've already talked about, it's the dominant system. It's the one that, holy shit, we're gonna die. And I think, you know, in professional practice and the conversations we've had for, again, decades, we've been up at the Houston, we've got a problem place. And when you're there, what happens is that there's these pioneers, and you're all likely, I know we've got lots of them in the room, but pioneers sort of decide this isn't my system, and so I'm going to kind of grow small roots and do something else, which is down there in the little red dots or orange dots, to depart from the system. And that's the beginning of emergence. And I hope it's the beginning of emergence of practice in professional practice for us. Do hope it. Next slide. So these are some of the pioneers, many reports of which I'm sure you're familiar, but that I include in my professional practice class on construction and evaluation. Next. The next phase of emergence of professional practice is the pioneers beginning to network and pool their resources together to make sort of begin to give birth to a new system. And I believe, you know, this is through communities of practice. I believe this is a really, really, really important place. That is appropriate that I'm at the Dean of Practice because part of it is shepherding a community of practice, but also it's one of the reasons why I really firmly believe that people with accredited architecture degrees should be able to call themselves architects. Because right now, I think our problem for being stuck in Houston, we have a problem, is that we haven't really been able to develop a community of practice for pioneers. And so I think that being able to have graduates with architecture degrees call themselves architects starts to create ownership of that new community of practice, which then we really honestly quite need to create this, to give birth to this new system, which does also mean the old dominant system will die. So next slide. Just to show you an example of a community of practice for my class, we have a Slack and we talk, and a very special thing about my class is that I get to teach construction and evaluation to students. Many of whom have construction and administration experience and are currently working in it, more than half of my students. So this is just a really great question. One of my students asked totally on her own, you know, what have you done this week at work, which you have had a gut feeling was inefficient? And ultimately, that's what makes the system die, is that you create yeah, you create a peak of efficiency. And at that point, when you know the pioneers recognize, like, we're not going anywhere here. And so that's when pioneers start to do their work. So you can see, you know, everything from I'm doing Excel sheets for schedules because my team doesn't do BIM, to I'm waiting on approval, they're on vacation, I have more work than I have people, and so I'm having to take on the work myself, which means I'm not supervising the people who are reporting to me. These are, just this is my spring class and the snapshot of why I believe the dominant system is going to die. So next slide. Couple other roles for us, and many of us are going to be playing in many of these roles, illuminating. So illuminating the choice between the old and the new. Illuminating, this is the way that we've been, AI 201. I mean, we're talking the whole system of our profession to what's the new path. So we need illuminators. Again, many of you are probably in the room to be able to show people the choice between the two. In this case, right now in my class, we have a project delivery comparison, and then they interview somebody, but they have to use integrated project delivery as a project delivery that they then compare whatever they want to. A lot of them choose design and build, old dominant normative system, but that way they're eliminating the difference. Next slide. We need hospice workers, so people who are compassionate and caring and supportive of those that are honestly going to have a really hard time with the death of the old system. This is just true. We need them, and it's because they are the ones who are honestly going to be shepherding the transition, helping people to realize that this is going to happen, whether you like it or not. And we quite honestly need you and want you, but whether you're on board, it's happening. So they're important. And you can think about places where they exist. I think also in this room they exist. They certainly exist in a lot of conferences that we go to, I'm sure. And I have an assignment, surprise savings, failure, innovation, where a student tells the story of one of those on a construction project. And they all of the time are choosing on their own failure. And it's a kind of an opportunity to just normalize failure, talk about it, and again, support themselves in moving into a different system. So next slide. The last are the protectors. And I think, AIA, NCARB, the folks that are, all right, 8 minutes, 28 seconds. The folks I'm going to talk to really quickly next are super important. They've got power and influence in the dominant system. And they can kind of make safe space for those innovators and those pioneers and the building of the networks and the communities of practice to continue to give birth to that new system. So again, protectors. This next project is something else I'm incorporating in my professional practice class, but also more broadly, next slide, is emphasizing protectors. So I think about a year ago, we launched Propel, which is Professional Practice Education Library. It's a partnership between ACSA and NCARB. It's something that I sort of we came up with, myself, Phil Bernstein and Renee Chang, in 2018, pitched to ACSA and NCARB, and they went for it. And so next slide. What it is the goal is to increase the breadth, depth, and consistency of professional practice, and really kind of specifically, a lot of these topics that we're talking about in the emergence, the new system that we quite honestly need. There are many students across the country that just don't have access to leaders and experts in those areas. And so creating a video library from experts to share really progressive emergent insights, but then also the normative dominant insights as well. So that is so we call it Propel, which is also an acronym for Professional Practice Education Library. We initially pitched it as we all know that professional practice has a little tiny role in the curriculum, usually about 3 credits, at least that's what it is at the BAC if you don't count the practice component. And yet it's about 25 to 33% of what NAB accreditation expects that students are taking away from their degrees. That is changing with the new NAB conditions, but in a way it's great, which means we're kind of falling into this bucket of professional practice and regulatory context. It also means that that dominant normative system could flounder because it's just sort of been, these things have been removed from it. And so it's possible, who knows what will happen. We could continue to innovate, which is what the hope was in redoing the NAB conditions. But we could also just die as well. So this is different, this has changed. And this was blurry, but these are some of the units, what we call units, which are a series of 6 lessons, which are short, 6 to 8 minutes. We've already done a number of them. Tom Fisher did an awesome one on ethics. We've got a great one on negotiation. They're free at the ACSA website, so you just have to do it as a login. Really high quality content. And so I encourage you all not only to go check them out, but to also submit to be a contributor to Propel so that we can kind of help expand the conversation. So that's it for me.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
All right.
Just be the slide. You turn your, make sure your mic's on.
That was amazing. I think I like the idea of all of the roles, the hospice worker, and the or like our micro, like undercover superheroes. Those are really clear breakdowns. All right.
Just keep going. Yes.
Okay. Oh, okay.
I was doing.
Did I lose that? Oh, okay, yeah, okay, good. So I thought, I thought I would maybe start with first principles, like, why are we kind of doing what we're doing anyway? And then maybe that would be a foundation for the 2 kind of classes that I teach at the GSD. Actually, at the GSD, we have an inordinate amount of practice classes. So we have the foundations, which Jeffrey teaches, and then we have a bunch of electives, and I exclusively teach the electives. So I kind of live in the emergent zone, and I've been doing that for about 3 years. But underlying,
I exclusively live in the old buddy that
he does a really good job.
So yeah, you gotta look for a job.
Yeah. I need a hospice worker.
Or the hospital.
Yes, there you go.
All right, well, so what do we want out of this anyway? We probably want design agency, right? We want to go out into the world and make a difference doing the things that we do well, which is designing. We want to be relevant culturally from an ecosystem perspective, right? That's why we're doing this. And increasingly practice itself, that the idea of practicing professionally or otherwise is a huge design problem. And that's a very exciting thing, but it also means that the profession is dying. I totally agree. So how do we encounter that for the students? How do I change the slide?
You push it in the same next.
Okay. Did you do it, Jenny? Okay. Great. Watch me do it. I mean, I think that the context has been framed right. It's really complicated. We live in a very complicated time, and the idea of teaching people how to practice in this time is frankly unfathomable. So the way that I've kind of set up the classes is less about, let's say, a distinct curricular set of objectives in terms of content that gets communicated, and instead it's setting up a framework for discussion, conversations, and inquiry. So it looks a little bit more like research, actually. All right, next. And one more piece of framing here, you know, I was just talking with Paul, architecture, this is Alberti, right, and the orders. We used to be all of design. Like architecture was design for so long. And now we're just this kind of like little piece of design. The world has shifted from the physical to the digital. The media of making our world is just really different. And so how we situate ourselves and what our relationship is to society is a little bit, it's a question. We're important, but how, right? So this is kind of what we're asking. Next. All right, so the 2 questions then, and they correlate to the 2 different classes that I'll briefly talk about. The first one is, you know, how the things that we produce, the sort of media and the stuff, so they're kind of there across the top: model, drawing, code, building, text, image, and profession. We make the profession, it actually is a product of what we do in architectural practice. How as these things change, how as the sort of waxing and waning of these things evolves over time, how it changes our agency and it changes our relationship with society. And so it's trying to get students in a way to look at these things critically. And what you're seeing here are these kind of fingerprints, and I'll talk about it in a moment, but it shows it's chronological in the y-axis, and it's a sort of zero-sum race between all of the things in a particular type of product. So I'll describe it in a moment, but basically what it's showing is that the practice has never been static. that in fact, models have gone in and out of favor many times, and drawings are, their own beasts that have a completely different way of operating. Specifications have radically changed in terms of what they used to be. So nothing is static, and so it's a sort of piece of research to look at and to understand from the inside that it's like a deep internal dive into the discipline and profession. Whereas my other class, the second one here, talks about when architecture gets complicated by systems level things, like how do we start thinking about technology and policy and regulation, and how do we plug into all of that, and when do we need to operate not just at the level of designing a building, but now also because we're dealing with massive urban complicated projects with hundreds of consultants that all make more money than we do. How do we think about operating? Do we operate within the system? Do we operate upon the system? Do we operate against the system as activists? How do we know how to do that and where? Next. So this is just a little bit of research, and I wanted to show this because the first seminar, it's called Project to Practice, from plan to code, from code to plan to code, and it talks about I have the students basically pick a subproduct like the digital twin, or the orthographic drawing, or the text treatise. And they go back and they look at these things over time, and they compare two different moments, sort of inflection points in time, where the profession, where the practice has radically changed. And so we look at what those products do, what they give us. What does it mean when we create a model in 1630 versus a digital twin in 2022? And how do we understand where our power was lying, and what it meant to create a specification now versus then? And so we're creating this very complicated and beautiful data visualization that you can all look at sometime at the end of the summer. Next. And basically it is an interactive web-based data viz project where you're going to be able to kind of take a slide, or it's sort of digital humanities project in a way, but it allows the students to understand very clearly how things have changed. So this is a little fingerprint that's showing the timeline here. This is a long time ago, and this is now. And generally, like, we wrote treatises for a long time. We're like, we know what architecture is. Let me tell you how the columns work. This is the orders, and that's the way it's gonna work, right? And then we have a whole zone here where a lot of people are starting to promote themselves. We have monographs. Now the architect is kind of operating in a different way within society, right? The foreign chief bankers are there. They got a lot of cash to splash around. And then we get into this moment where we have like the manifesto and what we're calling the discursive monologue. And this is kind of, a sort of post-Alberti moment where we're like very authorial, we have an idea about things, we're sort of radical change agents in society, and we're producing really different things. So every time we produce these things, the treatise versus the monographic versus the discursive monologue, we're having different conversations with society, or frankly, sorry, not with society, maybe just with ourselves. So it's a way of kind of tracing our relationship with society, maybe our relevance. Next. And this is just the way that we have been operating. I've been doing this for 3 years, so like COVID has been a significant portion of my experience in all of this. But it's been great because actually we have a huge amount of documentation over both Slack and Miro of the way that these things kind of come together. So it's a little bit like an exquisite corpse, where each student or each student group is doing a separate thing, and we have to find a way through the data visualization to work it all back together and allow for it to talk about the exquisite corpse of architecture and how it is about to become a true corpse. Next. And this is just one example of this work. This is a student who took on the manifesto in this case for the architectural text. Next. The second course is called Urban Stack. So I don't know if you all can read that. It's a bit granular, but it basically, the question is, why do things look the way that they do in the world? And how much control do we actually have over the outcomes of our work, and why? All right, next. So it looks at it through three different constructs, we're calling them. So this is the project. This is actually what we think we're working on. But in reality, the project is always operating in relationship to these three constructs: capital stacks, which we know a lot about, technology stacks, and policy frameworks. And so we have to decide, and it's operating in this larger set of conditions, right, that are the sort of macro things that we're dealing with, like the pandemic. And so we always have to decide where we can actually act and at what scale. And should we ever act back going this way, right? Like actually we have acted upon this, right? We actually made CAD. And now it's making like really good animations and movies, you know? So we do kind of operate back and forth. We have to decide when. Next. And it asks the question, and the students actually go through a sort of systems level analysis, trying to understand why these buildings all look exactly the same. You Google architecture, right? This is kind of what you get. Why do they look the same? Why do they all look like they're 18 different buildings smashed together? Next. And so a lot of this, of course, has to do with the question of private wealth versus public wealth and how larger economic systems are being distributed, which is a whole other topic I really like, okay? But it really does influence the way that we think about our work and who is funding it, right? When the private money is funding it, it's one thing, and when the public money is funding it, it's a different thing. So those underlying value systems and where the money comes from matters, of course. And so this is what they explore. Next. Jane, do you say I have 8 minutes? Am I? You're 19 minutes, okay. Yeah, you were calling. Go. So yeah, I mean, we get these kind of weird things. I was in Dallas a little while ago for a conference, and this was a building that I ran into. And it's amazing, you know, and it's a type. These are the new typologies of our world, and they're not created because, you know, because of the sort of reasons that Alberti was creating types. You know, this is a different game that has a lot more to do with the previous slide. So for the students, actually, we bring in economists, and the students try to understand not actually at the level of pro forma, but the level above it. How are investment managers making decisions, and why? And why do they make the same things over and over and over again based upon a set of returns? Next. And then from a policy perspective, why did, this is public housing, this you all might recognize Cabrini being in Chicago, and this is what came next, Hope 6, I think. But you know, this is what was being built in mid-century with HUD dollars, and this is what's being built now. Why do they look so different? Right? What is it about that? How do we kind of trace back? Of course, we look at things like new urbanism and why new urbanism has been so powerful because it's been operating at the level of policy, actually. And when should an architect work back up and operate at that level? How much impact do you want to have in terms of scale versus control at the project level? Next. And then finally, just to round it out, you know, we're a research institution, and so all of this this work kind of we try to push it as much as we can into a lot of summer work in this lab called the Urban Stack Lab, which is part of the Laboratory for Design Technologies. And so we hire a lot of students and research associates, and we try to think about how we can utilize the work that we're doing, how we can kind of operate back up as architects, but how we can also think about machine-human collaboration and larger forms of collaboration, and frankly, just how socio-technical systems are impacting our work in the future within the category of emergent systems. So I'll show just 2 quick projects there. Next. The goal is to ask questions like this. How do we situate ourselves as architects? What are we actually designing? When we sit between the design team, the context, right? The community context and artificial intelligence. How do we think about that? And what does that mean? Where do we have to situate ourselves? Next. So one example of this is something called open zoning. It's a project we're initiating now. The idea here is to think about open zoning more like, think about zoning data more like OpenStreetMap or GTFS, if any of you are familiar with that, as a sort of collaborative and crowdfunded exercise that will have the capacity to give more people more data and therefore lower the barrier to entry in terms of being able to develop, particularly at a small scale. Which is really, really tough to do right now. This kind of information tends to be, you know, kind of aggregated and accessed by our excellent consultants in the legal world right now. Next. So we take the things that we often draw, but we make them collaborative, open source, and machine readable. So, and that's like it's a kind of a weird thing. You know, there are actually a number of people working on this problem, this question of standards. But how you begin to open it up in a much bigger way is still kind of on the table, and I think it's a very good example of what might be next. And this is just a different kind of architecture. This is a sort of diagram, literally an architecture diagram back to the question of architecture being a very small part of larger design. This is also part of architecture, and arguably this kind of architecture right now is making a lot more impact, but hopefully they can come together here. Next. And finally, this should be moving. You should be able to see a fun interface. One of the questions we're asking, which is truly on the sort of emergent and fringe side, which is when we are looking at a future, and many times we're already seeing it, in which there is a large portion of what we're doing that's either being designed by a fund manager or by a kind of predetermined effective algorithm. How do we begin to think about what collaboration could mean, what we should be designing? And so this looks back and it actually uses a machine learning algorithm, but it puts it on the web and it starts talking about if we control the algorithm as designers, but we allow for the public to come in and also have a stake in it, what is the kind of architecture that we might get? And is it possible that it could be relevant? And that seems like a very scary thing for many of us in the room. It seems kind of scary to me, but at the same time, it feels like a worthy question to ask. So that is that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Sure. Try again.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Jeremy Munn. I think you're going to hear a lot of repeat information from me based on my peers, but with a slightly different spin. So just in context on the university, we are based in Boston, but we're global. I don't even think this list is appropriately long enough anymore. I think we're at like 15 sites. So we are expanding very quickly just some perspective. Next slide, please. And the School of Architecture sits here in Boston within the College of Arts, Media and Design, one of 9 colleges. And so that's where we sit next. And my background, school's background, we have a Bachelor of Science in Architecture, the Master's in Architecture at MArch 1, 2, and 3. We do attach the co-op to the undergrad, and so most of our students go through the co-op, so similar to Wentworth, where your students have substantial experience. And so I rely on a lot of that for how I teach my courses. The enrollment numbers are a little dated, but that's just gives you a sense of how big the school is. Next. And my background, so I do not have a master's in architecture. I have a master's in business administration. I am a licensed architect, but I sit on the client side, as Jeffrey said, and so I have a slightly different perspective than my peers do, though we have a lot of overlap on that. And so my primary job is as the client, hiring architects and contractors to deliver projects for Northeastern. I do have a side gig with the school where I teach 2 classes. I'm going to talk about those. And I'm also a startup advisor, which is kind of linked to some of the work I'm doing in the School of Architecture. Next, please. Can't see any of this. So this is the NAAB matrix. The 2 red boxes are the classes I teach and what they cover from an NAAB accreditation perspective. So it's a game. It's a challenge and opportunity of how to fulfill the needs of NAAB accreditation, which will get easier, with how to kind of keep students engaged that are coming from very different backgrounds. The MArch 1, 2, and 3 all have different experiences. Some of them have co-op, some of them don't. So I've got to teach the middle of the class. And so to do that, for one class, I start with, I assume none of you know anything. I'm going to take you down this other journey through business, which is the second class, which is related to kind of the future of practice. Next, and the first class is more the traditional. So these 2 classes kind of fulfill these criteria from NAAB. I won't go through it, but it's similar to what we talked about. Next, please. And so how that manifests itself in courses is this first class I teach is you're all in school to figure out how to do the work, right? You've gone to design school, you want to figure out how to design projects. That's great. I want to enable you to do that, so I'm going to teach you how to get work. Now, through that lens, I'm going to expose you to project management, schedule management, financial management, ethics, but I'm going to focus more on corporate strategy, brand, marketing, proposal writing, interviewing, ultimately for students to understand how to win work and how, as a firm, they have to position themselves to be the best to do that. Next, please. And so using this kind of pyramid of where you start, I expose them to corporate strategy and how that works, how corporate strategy actually manifests itself from branding, what that leads to from marketing, business development, all the way up through this top portion, which is how do you respond to an RFP or an RFQ by writing a successful proposal and ultimately leading to an interview. And my students spend the semester working on emulating real firms. I hand them a real RFP. They have to select a firm they think is best situated to win that work, back to corporate strategy. They write a proposal based on emulating that firm, and then they interview. And I bring critics in and we grill them. And the end of the semester, I'm sorry?
Very fun.
Yeah, it is. We award a winner to each of the RFPs at the end of the semester. And what the students come to realize is that the difference between winning and losing isn't much. And we all know this, right, as architects, right? You're gonna win a project based on your better alignment with the last project and the team that's available, right? There's the lack of differentiation in our market is really, really challenging. And so that's where I pivot to the next slide, which is, okay, so we've gone through the traditional market. This is, what do you call it? The hospice work.
Yeah.
So this is all hospice work and normative. And we move out to and say, well, if you don't want to compete in the traditional market, in the traditional rat race, I'm going to expose you to innovative business model and delivery. Next, please. And so I spend the second course I teach on what's a value proposition, on innovation, the difference between innovation and disruptive technology, alternative business models, entrepreneurship, and alternative careers. So I'm saying, if you want to be a traditional architect, great. All these skills are helpful. If you don't, great. I've got all these skills are also helpful in a different way. Next, please. And so we start with understanding existing business models, understanding what the value proposition and going through financial analysis. And then I expose them to alternative business models, how the value proposition there is different from traditional practice, and how we can think about alternative business delivery. And ultimately, the students have to create a business plan for a unique business innovation or disruption based on anything other than traditional fee-for-service in our industry. Could be architecture, could be engineering, could be construction, could be real estate. And they have to design a business plan, which I teach them how to do. Next. And so I start with the definition of the difference between something that's innovative versus something that's disruptive. So innovation, we see, Revit 3D model, right? Technology innovation that's helped us deliver projects faster, quicker, cheaper, etc. On the right is 3D printed buildings, which arguably we might not even need architects and contractors to do, right? It's a potential disruption to the way we do work. Next. So they work in groups and they, like I said, they design a business model around anything other than traditional fee for service. And I also align it with studio topics for their thesis. So the students at Northeastern at the master's level do not do an independent thesis the way I did as an undergrad. They work in thematic studios, and so groups of 10 all have the same theme. This past year, one of them was modular construction. So I had a whole bunch of modular construction business propositions that were designed as an example. Next. And so coming out of that, these are just some examples of pitches that the students gave at the end of the semester. And I bring angel investors and venture capitalists into the classroom and to critique the students on their pitch. So similar to the way Shark Tank contestants pitch for money, the students pitch for money. Sometimes they actually, I've had investors say, if you're real, I'll write you a check today. It hasn't happened, they haven't taken them up, but that's the idea. Next, please. These don't, all right, so these are examples of, the university does a university-wide research, innovation, entrepreneurship, and scholarship competition where the second class I teach on the business models is a great fit for the entrepreneurship model or category. And so the students end up submitting what they design in the class into the university-wide competition next. There's just a couple of examples of these propositions around a disaster relief organization, and the final one is empowering Haiti to rebuild itself through reforestation. So this was kind of a nonprofit theme. So the students have submitted, and actually I've been pretty proud, they've won awards at the university level for innovative designs around using design thinking to enable business models around anything other than traditional food practice. So I think that's it.
Okay. On.
Hello.
Wow.
You're on mute.
I'm not on mute anymore. Yeah, exactly. That was fantastic. This has just already been amazing. I hope there's questions and prompts from our audience, and probably you all have some for each other. I wanted to just kick it off with one question, then it'll be open, which I think has to do with, my question has to do with the expectation of the timeline of agency. So one side of, I think, what a lot of you are doing has to do with research, that if it could get in the hands of firm leaders, would be very useful. Me being a firm leader, we're quite busy, and it's somewhat difficult, even if I'm teaching these courses, also to pay attention to it in some ways. And the need to be the hospice worker for the firm that exists now is so heavily present on the mind of a firm leader, just in terms of making sure that you are winning projects in the way that you know how to feed the work that you know how to do. But then on the other hand are the students who are kind of almost in equal measure, it seems now, getting the traditional education and professional practice, and also some kind of innovative ideas about practice, either through a research of history and sort of seeing trends and where things are going, or through kind of exposures to new ideas and ways of thinking about either winning work or doing work. And I guess my question is, as sort of in the, what do you think is the expectation of students, or what is your hope for students who leave the school and enter the practice to be agents of change? Like what is the capacity of a graduated student to be an agent of change?
I can kick us off. I would love it for some of my students to actually take their idea out of my class and go get some angel investment money and be the agent of change. It hasn't happened yet. It's been 5 years of this class. So I think the reality is that they want to get their license. Most of them that come into the class they're in the final year of the master's, so they're like, let me just get my license. So that requires some more years of traditional practice. And so I phrase this with, in 5 years, you still have the toolkit to go out and be your own agent of change, right?
So your timeline is 5 years. Yeah.
5, 10 years, yeah.
I think I have a more complicated answer, of course. I don't know. I think there are a lot of, it depends on what agency is. I mean, they're going to be students that go out and actually do adjacent work, and they're going to get funded by venture capitalists, and they are going to make change within the next 2 to 5 years. And then there are going to be students who go out and go into into policy, and they're gonna be changed over like 10 years, you know? And then there are students who are going to go into larger scale firms that are very slow moving ships, like the Catholic Church, you know, and they're gonna like make change over 50 years, and eventually maybe their business model will change. And then there are gonna be students who go into mid-scale firms who don't have the bandwidth or the business model to keep up at all, and we're gonna die. But I think that's okay. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay, we're just gonna change, and we have a life cycle. And we're making change in different ways. I mean, our buildings still matter.
Yeah.
So I think that we just have to have a different idea about what, like, our definition for what agency means just has to change. And our idea about what we can accomplish as architects also has to change. So to me, it's more of like, what's our scope and how do we piece that out rather than like, when does it happen?
Yeah, I think agency is the #1 learning objective of the practice component at the Boston Architectural College, which I spend a lot of my time convincing people it's not to get you to just be sitting in an office, you know, drafting. And that's not my students I have to convince, it's everybody else. And, you know, I think it's graduating with a clear sense of how to make decisions when there's no clear right answer. I think it's graduating with a sense of how to really clearly communicate effectively. I think communication, you know, for me is, again, I dean of practice, it's weird to say, you know, dean of construction documents. It's not that. It's I'm responsible for making sure that our graduates really know how to communicate. Because if they're going to be agents of change, I hope that, you know, and I'll just use integrated project delivery. I mean, if you look at the survey, practice survey, it's the project delivery method that is a pioneer, that is growing more than the others. Certainly, you know, design to build is overwhelmingly everywhere, but that whole delivery model really emphasizes front-loading conversation, transparency, sharing of failures, sharing of weaknesses, you know, people coming to the table from every organization, you know, contractors, subcontractors, consultants, architects saying, I'm not good at this. I'm going to need help. And we don't really do that well, right? Like, who does that? The integrated project delivery front loads it and says, this is important. So for you, for firm leaders, I would say that it's a whole mind shift of your time is best spent sitting there talking to those people about this stuff than anything else that you do it.
I think about like when, you know, Rhino or 3D Max kind of really became a popular tool of design, and it coincided with the kind of the postmodernism. It was the digital before the post-digital, as they say, in which students who developed modeling skills, like incredibly impressive modeling skills in the school, whose work coincided with the zeitgeist almost of form making in the world, took on a role within firms that kind of stripped the old guard of their autonomy to make design. To where you know, older firm leaders could no longer control the design through the sketch the way that they were able to, because so much depended on the digitization of the model. Revit now has kind of democratized this a little bit more. And I wonder if professional practice has the same capacity. Like, is there some way to develop skills within the academy, detached from actual practice, which is always, I think about it sometimes as like, if I draw a wall in studio at school, or I draw a wall or a toilet in the practice, essentially it's the same skill. There's lots of different factors, but to rehearse practice in the classroom versus to rehearse it in the actual practice are somewhat different things. Is there a path of thinking, learning, and developing skills around professional practice writ large that could give edge to emerging practitioners to have more impact in practice. And we talked a little bit about this on an earlier call about how I think traditionally professional practices were aimed at the 20-year principle of the firm in terms of all the contracts and things that traditionally young people aren't exposed to so immediately. And it seems like a lot of the newer innovative conversations about architecture, professional practice are geared towards a generation that has just a more natural affinity for either the social topics or the digital topics or the political topics or the cultural topics or the startup topics that are potentially the seeds of change in the profession.
Well, I think it's a good question, but I think it's kind of moot because in some ways it's dying. It's going to die. I mean, we're going to be Boston Society of Taxi Cabs. Like it's a Boston Society of Rideshare. I think it's not going to make it. It's just not. And the whole living system thing is saying top down, like a machine, you engineer, you make a decision, it works this way. Our profession, architecture, is not like that. We do not top down make decisions like machines that will work this way. It's not going to work just because we engineer it to work. It's just not. And it's because right now, when we see everywhere, the value is in the pioneers. And it's in the conversation that you're saying. So instead of getting the graduates who have that to get up, to the dominant system to try to life support, dominant system's not going to work. It's going to die. It's not a question. It's going to die. So it's whether or not we can become rideshare people and stop the taxi cab medallions. I think it's about letting go of the licensure and needing to call ourselves architects if we're licensed, and that's it. And joining, building the community of practice that includes a very clear path for the pioneers to really have the emergent system be the new system that every architecture firm adopts.
I think it's a mindset shift too. I mean, which is I think what you're saying. Less about learning a new tool and more about thinking, in terms of scalable processes and a shift in business model. And I actually don't think professional practice is right. I don't think we should be teaching professional practice. That doesn't make a ton of sense. We should actually be thinking about practice, and professional practice is a piece of that, but where does the profession go and how do we think about what it is as a design project in its own right? I think is a worthy cause that needs to be picked up with more enthusiasm. So I'm not sure if it's about the tools.
At the end of the business model class, I had a student at last comment, and it's still stuck in my head from this past spring, which was, I didn't think I really I was going to get anything out of this class because she was in anti-culture, anti-big business. And she said, so what I ended up getting out of this class were the tools and the mindset and the pedagogy so I could fight it. So I understand how the construct works of how a business model works, right? How a business has to operate, what a value proposition is, how to position myself in the market compared to my competitors so that I can actually do it in an alternative way. And so I think for me, it comes back to providing these baseline skill sets that we're not getting in traditional architecture schools, so we can arm students to understand how the rest of society operates, right? We can argue, I agree with everything that was said tonight, and we can argue about different ways to do it, but it's I think we need to think about it without our architecture hats on. And I think that might be a more powerful way to do it.
What do you mean about our architecture?
Using the language of just general business, right? Let's think about how just somebody thinks about running any business other than ours, and how they would work through that process, right?
So you would gawk at the profit margins, for example, right? I mean, what is it, like average, I think across the board, 13% is is considered to be 25, this is the last survey, but 25% of firms said that they were high profit margins at 13%, which in other contexts, 13% is not a high profit margin. You're not patting yourself on the back saying high profit margin. So this is an example, right? Exactly what you're saying.
So it's interesting because a peer of mine is in consulting and he's trying to scale his business. And he talked to me and said, how do I raise money? And so I talked to my venture capital friends and they're like, how do you scale his business? It's based on people. And I'm like, yes, we have no interest. We want to scale based on technology. We want to scale based on something that's repeatable, right? So there are those kinds of things that are baseline current thinking for how to grow business that architects aren't thinking about, right? So I think to a certain extent, a lot of the future of where we're going is through technology. That's how we can enable design thinking, if you want to call it the broad term of architect, right, to be successful.
I think we have some questions, comments from the gallery here. I'm going to go to Pat first. Would you like to introduce yourself? Whoever you're from?
Yeah.
I'm a.
I am a structural engineer at Arab.
We're being recorded, Pat.
Oh, my.
Hello, testing. Okay, Pat McCafferty, structural engineer at Arab. For the purpose of this conversation, also a lecturer at the GSD. I'm wondering, you asked the interesting question about, and I like the analogy about Rhino, free student max, and you know, how that was transformative. It was a skill that was taught to the students that was transformative. I'm wondering, as you know, a biased consultant, if you ask me, I think the missing ingredient in the academy right now is that we don't necessarily teach students how to collaborate, coordinate, be the conductor of things, of processes. It is a very human thing. And frankly, that is how these systems are coming together. It is still very individually focused, even the tools, right? That's not how practice works. At least that's not how good practice works. And I wonder if that human element is the next one.
Yeah, and I actually think like the question of, I actually think it's not just the human to human collaboration, which is obviously critical, and how we kind of structure those larger teams, but actually how we think about collaborating with machines more effectively. Like that, I actually think those things they're equally important as the scale of projects grows in complexity and actual scale, and what's efficient versus not efficient has to be considered.
So we have one thing to say this also.
Well, just really totally agree. You know, again, dean of practice is for me communication, decision-making agency, teamwork and collaboration. I mean, these are things that you kind of feel like you should be teaching, and you know, my child's probably getting it in preschool. But you know, it's not, don't take it for granted. Like this is the stuff because we're humans, we're living people. It's not a machine. So I really agree with you on that. And I also think if we go back to the kind of two loops, or we could call it two arches if we want to be funny, the communities of practice is where we're stuck. All of us are stuck because we've got amazing pioneers doing amazing things and we're all really excited about it. But the collaboration, the pooling of resources, the figuring out the links, we haven't figured it out yet. So we're seeing productivity obviously not growing like it is in all of the other industries. McKinsey is great. McKinsey has a whole design department. McKinsey's globally, probably a very influential global finance consultancy. And they opened a design department, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago at this point, but they've done a lot of really great reports. The construction industry one is one. So definitely, check it out. There's no question that design has value. And they have a recent report, I think it was published about a month ago on cross, what the heck is it called? Teams and cross-functional teams, and what it is that, that's a really, that's the most important ingredient in design and the way that you realize value through it. And one of those elements of cross-functional teams is the ability to adopt and change software and tech very quickly. And so within 6 months, pick one up, use something, don't use it anymore. And so successful collaboration and teams tend to have a very short timeline in their ability to use and then let go of software and technology.
It should be said that the AIA is not helping here. Our contracting is not keeping up. So what do we think of as a construction document? Like that's a problem, right? Because that actually hinders collaboration.
I think to answer your question through my lens of teaching is 55% of the students' grade is reflective of group projects in both classes. So I have some groups that I never hear from and they just produce and they grade each other at the end. And so they have influence over slackers in their groups. I have other groups that come to me and say, we've got a performance issue. And I say, all right, you're going to learn more from this than anything I'm going to teach you is how to navigate through this performance issue with your team. And there's different, and this isn't the real world. So I can step in, right, and make sure you guys don't fail. But it's up to you guys as to when or if you want me to step in and kind of shake things up and get things back on track, right? So I orchestrate large project delivery, right? I mean, you're one of my many consultants. So I spend a lot of time on my full-time job assembling teams and making sure they're working well. And as the owner, as the client, I can sit down and be like, stop the crap, like we got to deliver the project. Now, it doesn't always work that way, but sometimes it's like, that was horrible, the project got done, what did we learn from it? But back to your question on, like, it's so important that nobody does anything in the background anymore, is I set up my classes to reflect.
And that's great. And that's excellent. And frankly, in my class, it's the same thing. So I teach a structures course at UC, and it's all group work.
Yep.
I remember even as a student back in the 1900s at Cornell, like, so I was in the engineering school. We got like a preeminent architecture school, like literally across the campus, and they never communicated, which was preposterous. Right? And to my knowledge, they still don't. To me, that's so yes, interdisciplinary teamwork is great, but if you can do it multidisciplinary, and that's the piece I think that's critical.
Well, this is actually where the discipline has problems too. And this is a larger structural issue that we don't need to go into per se, but I mean, I do think the way that we have our faculty set up to rise encourages siloing. And that siloing trickles down into the way that we can or cannot collaborate across schools, certainly, and disciplines.
So at Northeastern, it's actually the opposite. We're looking for interdisciplinary opportunity. And so like when we opened our interdisciplinary science and engineering complex building, the only way you could get in there as a researcher was if you put together an interdisciplinary research team. And so the institution was looking for ways to force collaboration.
Yeah, but you still can't get elevated unless you're publishing your silo. It's a thing. But I think everyone's trying to do it. I think it's just hard.
Yes, sir. Come back.
Hello, my name is Jane. I teach at Brunswick. It's really interesting as trying to start off, but to your point, forced silo. I really would love to take your classes. And I taught at Northeastern right to BXC, and I've gotten kicked out of PowerPoint classes. I feel like at home. I'd like to go back to the metaphor of, the dominant, normative versus the emergent, progressive. And I really like the idea of the hospice and the notion of the hospice worker, right? But you also have to have the corollary, which is emergent. And there's a way in which we have to sort of consider not just how to nurture the emergent to take care of the person who is in the hospice. It's also, right, because the great thing about that metaphor is that this is a conversation we have to just add worldwide about, what do they call them, key workers or essential workers, right? So those hospice workers, right, because it's not just for sort of the paradigm that's currently shifting. We know that paradigm, the new paradigm that's coming in, is going to shift too. And we have to prepare the hospice workers for them at the end of that life. And I just wonder whether we are thinking about that. Thank you.
Do you have the midwife is an alley? Is that yours yet?
I
'Cause
had
you should
mine.
definitely adopt that. That's very good.
I had two midwives, so for my two kiddos, midwife. Yeah, I love that, and Jay. Yeah, I mean, I think that you make such a good point about, a little bit about, and it's what I was thinking when you used the rhino example, which I totally saw. I was at Raphael Vignoli's office for 10 years, and I saw it. People with the bottles just straight up with Raphael for years, and then everybody else kind of didn't have that same access. I think that those skills, the kind of the communication, the care, the compassion, the human connecting, the being able to make more time. We have a really bad time management, and we look at where we are with labor and how we work. And so we see it worldwide, but I think we see it debatably, but even worse within our ecosystem. I am committed to helping at least I don't know how many, 650 students that we have at the Boston Architectural College, of which I can, at least for the time being, influence and say that they need to get this experience. I am working to do that. I do think, kind of talked about separating the academy and practice. Higher education is also a dominant normative system that is going to die. It's also going to die. And there's things like companies creating their own academies that then they train and certify their own employees to have the skills that they need without going to college to save all of the money that they will then be in debt for. That's real. That's already happening with large companies. I think even Gensler has started a kind of apprenticeship training program. So I don't know. I think that the two separate places is also higher education is a dominant normative system that will die as well.
Start looking for jobs.
Jeffrey, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
So Jeffrey really does have an amazing class that he teaches, and you teach foundations, you do it very well, you run this firm. How do you feel about this conversation?
It really good. I think
Can
at
I
the,
put a nuance on that?
Yeah.
Because we just got up here and and it struck me, I actually feel uncomfortable about it. We are basically talking about how we're leaving behind, we're not actually teaching professional practice. We're teaching something else. We're teaching our students to go out and do other things. And I feel uncomfortable about that, actually.
yeah, so, I mean, I am fully 100% committed to the idea of an architect as a designer of buildings. I'm like dedicated to architecture as the design of buildings and the delivery of the design of buildings, the delivery of sets to tell other people how to build buildings, and the collaboration with incredible world-class consultants to make really great buildings. And I think that, our students are often not prepared to do that, or to operate in the world in which everyone else is operating to make good buildings. So we're constantly coming in underprepared, either to understand the offices that we're working in, the demands that our own bosses are placing on us, and the demands that the clients are placing on them. It's like that's one of the things you understand kind of only through experience soon after you get hired. How, you're working for your boss, but they're working for someone else, right? And if they don't know what they're doing in this world of professional practice, then, you're the one who gets kind of, you get hurt. And so I'm very glad actually at the GSC that we get a whole semester to work on the dominant normative. And I would say to not accept it as it is, but to understand it and to be able to operate innovatively within it. And that said, one of my frustrations personally with all the comments or the commentary and the discussion and the exercise and the discourse around innovative practice is they tend to seem to leave the idea of designing buildings behind. They tend to be about making a startup or making a code or making a zoning thing or like working with the developer or working in policy. I just want to design amazing buildings. And I want to know how to do that really well and make a profit. And not get sued. Yes. Gabriella. Yeah.
Wow.
Just introduce yourself and.
Oh,
yeah.
right. Gabriella Byerly, hi, architect of Feingold Alexander, adjunct instructor at the University of Minnesota. So many thoughts. First of all, thank you all. I want to address Pat's comment about the class that talked about the multidisciplinary aspect of our industry, because I teach that class. I teach an intensive 7-week-long graduate studio, where the first week we review 1950s drawing set by Marcel Breuer. The next week we review the structural drawings. The next week we review the MEP drawings. And the time in between those lecture times, the students are producing work that reflect on something that they've learned from the drawings. And so it gives us time to go through and find the exact same drawings and understand what role each discipline had in those drawings. But I love that we're also talking about obsolescence here, because that's one of the things that I appreciate about the curriculum that I'm teaching in, because we talk about this really old 1950s building that is an abbey, and well, there's a housing crisis. Can this turn into residences, right? Like we put these questions forward, but then we also talk about, for instance, the folk MoMA debacle, and obsolescence in architecture and Gorman Clark, like, is that preservation? So I do want to say, yes, we need more classes to do that, and I'm sort of like, we might think that it's insulated, but I did have kind of a direct question to all of you, which relates to what you just said, because I feel like I shared the view that you do, which is, I just want to design nice buildings while also making a profit. And the question is, how do we all feel about the unionization efforts happening here in the US and everywhere in the world? And how are you approaching that in your classes? Like, is it brought up or is it not?
We brought it up in our class. Luckily this semester, I had a small group, and at the beginning of the semester, I just said, we have some flexibility, and so bring topics we want to talk about. And so we talked about unionization. I just provided general construct of what unionization is to the students. And then we talked about the specific, I used the New York Times series of articles, right, to go through it with architecture. And it was funny, it was like one of the students was like, how do we just cancel society, right? And it's like, well, so like, there's general frustration, right? I don't have the answer. I'm not a union specialist. But I think to Jeffrey's point, like, in 10 years, are we going to be designing buildings, or is artificial intelligence doing things, right?
I'm going to be. designing.
Yeah, no, I actually, I want to speak in support of designing, and I'll just like say, it's a really important question, in support of designing buildings. I think it's actually really important. Buildings. I think that the question is, in my mind, so I'd like to answer very much. I think this is a very important piece of the conversation tonight. I think the question is not whether we design buildings, but how and what mindset we have to bring to it in order to do it. And my personal take is that drawing in the way that we draw, to me, I don't know how to do it without doing that. I don't know how to do a thing without drawing with my hand. And I don't think that that's bad, but I think it now comes with the other piece, you know, that there's now another piece and not drawing, you know, it's a different way of thinking, I think. So anyway, whatever it's worth. But I think it's related to this question of unionization, which is it's just thinking in a different model. We, my pedagogical framework is one of inquiry. It's framed inquiry. And so unionization came up within that context with the Shock New York Times article. And one of the observations made by the students is that it was so remarkable that it was Shock, you know, because they're one of those practices that has always been out on the fringe and the forefront of these other aspects of innovation and model shifting, both in terms of business model, but also in terms of mindset. And so the students said, well, maybe it was because they were so innovative and they allowed that and encouraged and cultivated that way of operating. Maybe that's why unionization happened there. And so then we go back and we say, okay, well, what does it mean then to think about operating within a system, upon a system, or against a system? And that's where we now have to sort of, we have to ask ourselves, well, where do we operate and how, you know? And each of those are really different roles in the same way that you're talking about roles, that the architect, those are different positions and roles that the architect can have within society, but they're distinct from each other and they each have a place. And so I think the unionization effort, the AIA trying to, you know, these are all different things and trying to figure out how to set out those territories is, I think, our job right now.
Yes, and construction evaluation is the primary professional practice focus that I think of. So unionization is already in the conversation because of unions for trades. You know, we do good Zaha Hadid's, the sort of FIFA Cup and the deaths with the workforce there and the responsibility is an architect's fault. So we have those kind of conversations. I think having a work-based learning requirement, we're really committed to what the experience of work is and see employers as learning partners. So I probably haven't been talking about it that much. I don't, you know, I think it's still in the dominant system. I think it won't help. Design bid build is a problem. I hate it. I think that it is one of the reasons why we don't make the profit. You know, it's a dominant system. I would like to see it go away, and I completely agree with what you said. In that it's not whether we'll build buildings, but how. You really have to think.
Yes, hello. Hello, is it working? Hi. So my name is Sophia. Jeffrey was my thesis advisor. And I came out of school with that exact intent. Getting my license, getting my hours, getting my time, understanding a little bit more about how architecture actually works, because at the GSD it was great, but your head is in the clouds. So you come out thinking, I really want to see the practical side of it. And I have seen it. And now I decided that I wanted to go and see if I can build my own practice. And so I need a midwife, like, you know, many. And actually, thank you again to Elizabeth. She was nice enough to have a conversation with me alone and talk about practice a little bit. I'm coming out from the perspective of seeing all of these changes, but my main question that I cannot get a good answer to on my own is, how do we present the design value or the value of design? And I still think of it as like either those angel investors that give you money because you have something that can be stamped over and over again, or, you know, you have your modular architecture, whereas those same angel investors, if they were to build a home, they would want the one-off, the super expensive design thing because they want all their friends to be really impressed. So same thing with cities where you have the Liebeskins and the this and the that, right? So it's almost like being dressed in a really fancy brand, showing off something as a design, but most of us are not operating within that field. Most of us want to understand how to bring design value to our clients and to the society that we're serving. I still don't know how to do that and find the language for, the people who are not familiar with the design language, with architecture speak, with design speak, who are not within our community. How do you break that down so that our value can be, really seen, and maybe those margins will go up, right? Like, is there something that you touch on in your courses and in your teaching that talks about that?
Sophia, when you were talking, I was thinking about also Jeremy's comment about the lack of differentiation in the discipline and the inevitable kind of idiosyncrasy that means one firm gets, $1 million fee and the other firm gets nothing. And I think I love this question so much. I'm thinking about how I do an exercise in my foundations class where unwittingly give students, it's a little exercise, a bunch of Post-it notes. And I put on the board like where you sell, what you sell, and who you sell to. And one of the things is design, right? And one of the things is like, what are you selling? Are you selling design, or are you selling like competency, like technical competency or something? And I would say in like 5 years of doing this, the Post-it notes have drifted from the design corner down to the technical competency corner. And what I've asked my students about that, and what they're also commenting on is even the students are sensing a lack of differentiation about design, which means I think the question is both, like for me, it's like, how do you sell design, and is your design different enough from another's to be a differentiating component? What do you? Yeah. Oh, Mary Kay.
So I guess I was I also went to the GSD. Jeffrey was my instructor, and he's my boss. And I guess I really liked Sophia's comment about, I think, value systems. And I think at the end of the day, we're trying to find like imagine value systems, whether you're working for a workplace or whether you're looking for that project of a client. And what Jeffrey just said got me thinking about that, maybe we're a part of the architect's ego, and the design ego tells us that we're selling a product and a building, but it sounds like to me more and more of the marketing conversations I'm overhearing that we're trying to go more for the experience, because there's just, maybe it's because we can't specifically differentiate the design product or the design value from others as clearly to people who are not as well versed in it, but that, we're leaning more and more heavily into like, this is what it's going to be like working with us, or like, this is the experience of a building you're going to get, and the conversation is more focused on that in a way. Not to say that I think we're still probably designing in the same way that we care about the builtness and the materiality of the building equally, but the way we speak about it is maybe, or the way we try to sell it from a business perspective is leaning more and more into the experience. What do you think about that?
I hear what you're saying. I think though, like to me, there's also this like, we have a tendency to be like, it's our fault. We're just not making a case for ourselves. But actually, I sometimes sit on, I totally do this too. And, but I do sit in sometimes on these conversations between some of my colleagues in the business school and law school about shareholder versus stakeholder capitalism. And there's a really, really big difference between value and value systems. What value is for stakeholder capitalism versus what it is for shareholder-driven capitalism, which requires a very specific kind of profit. Like we kind of can't compete with that. Like what we value just isn't ever going to be valued within that framework. That's why the buildings look the way that they do. And, you know, and that's a consequence of the Getty's diagram, you know, well, it's my diagram that I made in my book. But that's kind of what that is. And so I you know, and that's a different kind of practice. You know, that's a practice that relies upon a different kind of scale. You're stamping out affordable housing and you're stamping out hospitals. That's a really critical aspect of our built environment, you know, but it's just different. And what you're talking about is something else. It's not that. That's because that's a lot of value. And actually they're really profitable.
Yeah.
Really profitable, right? Because that's like you're using that plan over and over again. That detail, it's going to happen every time. But that's not the kind of architecture you make, and that's not the kind of value you want to make. You know, so I actually think we're like when we talk about what is value in architecture, that's like a whole can of worms. And so getting square about what your value systems are, and then finding the people that are aligned with those value systems, I think is the only thing to do. The problem is that the people and the clients that are aligned with our value systems are further and fewer between right now. In the world that we live in. So I think that's the problem. I just don't think it's our fault.
This might be getting into the shareholder stakeholder differentiation, which is a really good one. But McKinsey, the global financing consultants, you know, 2018, I think that's when they created their, maybe prior to creating their design arm. But there's a report which you probably read, the business of design. And it just, you know, it clearly shows that design is extraordinarily valuable. It's the most valuable element that the companies and shareholders have. Like it's
Yeah, but that's not architects.
It's not architects, but it's design. And so why isn't it us? I think part of it is that we aren't as sure of it as McKinsey is. Or as, you know, JetBlue or whoever else is really.
Because we're not scalable. We have to deal with people and the ground.
Yeah. Well, let me say this. When, yeah, I see MJ, you have your hand up. When I'm, you know, at my daughter's dance class and somebody who's looking to have a renovation done to expand their home in Cambridge says to me, yeah, I had an architect come in here. I couldn't believe how cheap he was. I tutor for $300 an hour, and his rate was less than 100. Couldn't believe it. You know, that's the architect's rate. And that's also all of us and what we teach expectations to be. And that is a one-on-one human scale. And I think it starts there. You know, it starts with that. There's a tutor for an hour, they get $300+ to teach you math. And then there's somebody who's going to create something for you that you're going to be in for the rest of your life, raise your family and thrive, stress out, you know, have sex, like all these things. And, you know, yeah.
It's an AA problem though, right? I mean, because it's a fee problem. I like your hat a lot.
Thanks.
And I really think that like a better world is coming. But that the AIA either needs to, you know, like maybe the BSA, we're like a really powerful chapter. We should go lobby about this. It's a fee structure problem that leads to an equity problem that leads to, you know, all of the problematic aspects of our.
Paul jump in. Paul's been waiting very patiently.
Yeah, but mine's sort of heading in a different direction.
Well, Jeremy, you wanted to say something. It's okay. Okay.
And I think mine is more of an observation that maybe a question more so than it is a question. And I'll preface this by saying I'm the MIT representative on the schools committee without a name. But one of my observations is that before I came back to MIT 7 years ago, I was teaching at the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago, a 5-year Bachelor of Architecture program where maybe 95% of our students would go into a traditional architectural practice after graduation. Maybe 5% would drift off into adjacent fields like real estate, interior design, what have you. At MIT, I come in 7 years ago and I start to see that maybe 30% of our students are going into traditional architectural practices after graduation. So what are the other 70% doing? And I started investigating that, and over the past 7 years, I've been watching it, and I've seen them go into disruptive technologies, things that are companies that are out to get us, us meaning architects and traditional practices. They're going to companies that are allowing them to take their design skills in directions that, a traditional architecture firm would never let them go. And then there's entrepreneur opportunities at MIT that let them basically investigate companies that they might want to start up on their own to disrupt our industry, paid for by our industry, ironically. But what I guess I'm getting at is there's this observation about peer pressure in a school like IIT, and I suspect like Northeastern and the BAC to a certain degree as well. All of your classmates are going into traditional architecture practice, so you too will go into an traditional architectural practice, and chances are you'll start a traditional architectural practice if you do start a practice of your own. Only one student I know of in 16 years of teaching there started a practice that I would describe as out of the norm. MIT, the culture, not just within architecture, but throughout the institute, is to just disrupt, do something new, to do something different. And I think I thought of it as a bad peer pressure when I first got there 7 years ago. So I thought, oh, we should be graduating more traditional architects. But now I'm starting to think maybe it's actually a good thing because they are going out and really starting to question what the traditional architecture practice is. And I think they're comfortable doing that because all of their peers are doing that as well. So they don't feel the pressure to go into a traditional practice.
I think we don't have enough advocacy to teach the general public the value of design from an architecture perspective, and that's why we have all this junk, right? And so my knee-jerk reaction was, I don't know how to fix that, so I'm going to enable my students to go out and use their design skills in a different way, right? That was just, and so that would be my advice to you is don't go compete in the normal model, which I think might make you shiver because I'm pushing people out of traditional practice, right? Instead of figuring out how to make it work. But that's just like, I'm not in traditional practice myself. So I've left for a number of reasons, and I feel like I might have more agency because I get to hire the architects and the contractors and assemble teams to deliver what my internal clients want, right? Ultimately, it's not about the process of designing. It's not about the process of building. It's about occupying that building for some specific use. Now, I'm lucky at Northeastern, our president has a very strong eye for design. And so we get to design and build some pretty cool buildings, but that might change.
I have a hard time like going back to your hat, which I really like.
I'll sell it to you.
I get paid $100 an hour. I think there's something about our value, which is actually is imagining what a better world is. And I keep coming back to this, and it kind of scares me because I mean it's definitely a yes and thing. Yes, we need to train for your firm, and yes, we need to train in the way that you're talking about. But how we equip students with the mindset and the skill set and the sort of fluidity of mind to engage the tools that we have within our discipline to make a better world and to use design fiction and the capacity that we have to imagine the future culture, I think it's still our strongest thing. That's like ancient, it's kind of like world building. It's what we do. The question is just what is the media that we're using to do it right now? I mean, I was speaking with somebody in Israel yesterday, a colleague of mine who's gone, GSD trained architect who's gone into a sort of disruptive innovation around housing design. So they're trying to eliminate the architect and also the GC in a way. But what he's doing is actually fascinating. I mean, he has a really beautiful vision about what communities can and should be. So I don't know, I think it's a yes and thing.
Yes. Last comment, question here.
I actually think that Sophia's question is really important, but to counter McKinsey, I was reading early in my architecture career, ladies was commenting about this idea. And I think you use the example of the Seagrams building and how the way the world is structured such that wealth distribution is done in such a way to the chart that you had earlier about public funding versus private funding, so that we have to go, hand in hand, begging Seagrams who made their money off of liquor to actually give us the public space. And they do it in this very interesting way, and which is very counter, right, to the way all the other buildings that are synchronic in the area. But that's now actually becoming more there again, but it's done in a very different way. In other words, space is given over, this largesse, right, occurs now, but it happens also in the interest of making money, right? Because every square foot of quote public space, unquote, is actually commercial space. So it's quite different again. And so the way that it manifests is very different. So that was sort of a very interesting comment that I remember from David, and I could be misquoting him, but I have a kind of a counter, and so that's kind of was my, sadly, the only optimist, as optimistic as I could get. My pessimistic thought was, to your point, and I do teach, a lot of tech stuff, running simulations, and I'm looking at AI, which was brought up, and I'm thinking, well, you don't need architect, you don't need a designer, you have robots, you have AI, and you could do a Google search, and the Google search which actually gives you, right, a quote, good design, unquote, right, based on, aggregate preferences, and then you 3D print it. And so you eliminate the whole entire construction industry. In fact, maybe it just gets sent, a truck, you go on Amazon, you pick one, and a truck shows up and 3D prints it and goes, right? So, so there's a part of me that worries that our excitement about technology may hasten our demise.
Yes, it's an important question. I think that what I would quibble with is the idea that Google is returning you a good design. Google's just returning you a design, but it's actually an important distinction because we're trained, right? We're trained to say this is good. This is like that. That's kind of our, let's say, our expertise. And if we are designing that algorithm, we would design a different algorithm with a different return than Google. We have somehow, this is this remarkable thing. I sometimes give this lecture where let's go back to Alberti. He had like all this education, all these plans in his brain, he's pulling from them. And now we are here, instead of Alberti, pulling from the entire history of material culture on the internet. And so how we access that and how we ask the question to ask it and to speak with the machine in order to access that data, actually, I think that's the thing. I think that's the thing.
Yeah, but doesn't that promote hegemony? How does that, negatively affect BIPOC communities, elderly people, young people?
Absolutely.
People are not designing decision
No,
making.
I'm with you 100%, but I think that's precisely why it matters. So I guess and I'm not a techno determinist in any way, shape, or form. No, I'm a techno optimist. I think I'm a realist, and the world would tell us that we do the same things over and over and over again, and technology just scales them. So social change actually, or social entrenchment, leads technology. So if we see ourselves as imagining the better world, I think we have to get involved in that because that's a little bit our territory. And we have to then become advocates working within, upon, and against that system, because I think closing our eyes isn't going to work. That's my hunch. I don't know the answer about how that works exactly, but I do think it's our territory.
But you have many gatekeepers there as well.
Yes. It's a hard problem.
And I think, just capital, the last time I was in this room, it wasn't exactly the last time, but it was close to the last time. It was Now Practice Now. You're the moderator. I was not sitting here, I was right there. And it was on cash, architecture and cash. And And someone sitting over there made the distinction that, Disney, for example, made money so that he could kind of make movies and make stories for everybody. So when I'm like quoting McKinsey, it's not, I don't want us to make money just so that we can be making money and just as much as the tutor. It's because I think that you're right. I think that the questions, the input, the way to get to where we'll make a better world, I do think it really matters. And I think that value, the money value, should be in the hands of people who are thinking the way that we're thinking, so that they can, share it in places it's not being shared, give it up to people that need it and don't have access to it. And $100 is just crazy to be able to pay. Couldn't do that. So I think that is for me really important, because that's why I quote McKinsey so much. The money needs to be in our hands so we can put it in the right places.
Anything else, Jeremy? This has been a really terrific evening. Thank you so much, Beth, Jeremy, Elizabeth, and to our audience for participating. A lot to take away. This event is recorded. It will be on YouTube at some point soon. And don't forget, we have another summer session on June 29th on the topic of materials and making. The participants are posted on will be posted on the website shortly. Another conversation, different people, different moderators, different schools may be represented, and we look forward to inviting you all into that conversation as well. Thanks again. There's some snacks in the back if you have some comments.